Hello and welcome to the Horror Night Stories. You can support me by hitting that subscribe and like button and comment, what should I improve as beginner? Now let's begin today's story. They say the mountains keep their secrets, that some places on earth are so cold, so quiet, that even the truth freezes with time. Tonight, we return to one of those places, a lonely slope in the Ural Mountains where 9 hikers walked into the dark and never came back. What happened to them has haunted the world for more than 60 years. This is not just a story of snow and silence. It's a story of fear, of mystery, and of something that watches from beyond the light. This is the Dyatlov Pass Incident. In the endless white wilderness of the Ural Mountains, there are no witnesses, only the wind, the cold, and the silence. But in the winter of 1959, something broke that silence. Something that left behind one of the most disturbing mysteries in history. 9 experienced hikers went into the mountains. None of them came back alive. What happened to them has never been fully explained. The story begins in late January, when a group of students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute decided to embark on a challenging expedition. Their goal was to reach a Torten mountain, located deep in the northern Urals. To get there, they would have to cross another mountain first, one known by the local Mansi people as Kalat Sial. The name means Mountain of the Dead. To outsiders, that might sound like superstition. To the hikers, it was just another mountain, another adventure. They were young, strong, and well-trained. They had no reason to fear what was waiting for them. The group was led by 23-year-old Igor Dyatlov. He was an experienced hiker and engineer, admired for his calmness and discipline. With him were 8 others: Zina Kalmogorova, lively and optimistic; Rustam Slobodin, a skilled athlete; Ludmila Dubanina, brave and outspoken; Yuri Doroshenko, known for his strength; Alexander Kolatov, the quiet thinker; Georgy Krivanishchenko, the joker of the group; Nikolai Thagoks Brignoles, intelligent and kind; and finally Yuri Yudin, the 10th member, who would turn back before reaching the mountain due to illness. His decision would save his life. He would be the only one who ever made it back. Before Yuri left them, he said goodbye at a small village near the edge of the wilderness. He later recalled how happy they all looked, smiling and waving as they disappeared into the white horizon. He didn't know it was the last time anyone would ever see them alive. For the next few days, everything went as planned. The group kept detailed diaries and took photographs. Those images still exist, frozen moments of joy, laughter, and youthful energy. They joked around, sang songs, and teased one another as they pushed through the snow. Despite the freezing temperatures, their spirits remained high. But the Urals are unpredictable. The deeper they went, the colder and more violent the weather became. On February 1st, they reached the slope of Kholat Syakhl, and a storm began to rise. Visibility dropped to almost nothing. The wind howled across the mountain like a living thing. It's believed they lost their way and decided to stop and camp on the slope rather than descend to the forest below, which would have offered some protection. No one knows exactly why they made that decision. Maybe they were too exhausted to keep going. Maybe Dyatlov wanted to stay on course for the next day. Whatever the reason, it was a deadly mistake. They pitched their large tent on the open snow and settled in for the night. 9 people inside a single canvas shelter, surrounded by the endless cold. Outside, the temperature fell below -30 degrees Celsius. The wind screamed across the mountain. Inside, they must have been cold but calm. They cooked food, shared jokes, and wrote in their diaries for the last time. Then, at some point during the night, something happened. Something that terrified them enough to make them cut their way out of their own tent and run into the darkness without shoes, without coats, without reason. When the group didn't return, no one panicked at first. They were experienced hikers, after all. Delays were normal in such harsh terrain, but as days turned into weeks, families began to worry. By February 20th, the search began. Rescue teams made their way into the Ural Mountains. At first, they found nothing, only snow, wind, and silence. Then, on February 26th, one of the searchers spotted something half buried in snow. It was the hiker's tent. It was still standing, but partially collapsed and covered by snowdrift. When they looked closer, they saw that it had been cut open from the inside, not unzipped, cut, and the cuts were clean as if made in panic. Inside, everything was left behind: boots, coats, food, maps, even money and cameras. The way they left it made no sense. It was as if they had been forced to flee suddenly. But from what? Before we continue, I hope you already hit that subscribe button and hit like. Shared thoughts in comments. Following the tracks in the snow, rescuers found footprints, barefoot or in only socks, leading away from the tent, heading toward the nearby forest. The prints went on for more than a kilometer before disappearing into the trees. And then, near the edge of the forest, they found something that made the rescuers freeze. At the base of a tall cedar tree was the remains of a small campfire. Beside it lay the bodies of two men, Yuri Doroshenko and Georgy Krivanishchenko. They were barefoot, wearing only underwear. Their hands were burned, as if they had tried desperately to warm themselves at the fire. Branches high on the cedar tree were broken, evidence that one of them had climbed up, perhaps trying to see the tent through the storm, or perhaps trying to escape something. The rescuers could only imagine the terror that forced them to leave the tent and run half naked into the snow. Between the cedar tree and the tent, they found three more bodies: Dyatlov, Kolmogorova, and Slobodin, scattered across the slope, as if they had been crawling or trying to return to the tent. Their poses were haunting. Dyatlov's hands were clenched tightly around the snow. Zina's body was turned toward the tent, as if she had been struggling to make her way back. Rustam Slobodin had a fractured skull, but no other major injuries, suggesting he might have fallen repeatedly before dying of exposure. 5 of the 9 had now been found. All had died from hypothermia, but that didn't explain why they fled into the storm. For weeks, the remaining 4 hikers were missing. The search teams dug through snowdrifts, explored ravines, and used sticks to probe the ground. Then, in early May, when the snow began to melt, they found the rest of them. 4 bodies buried deep in a ravine, about 75 meters further into the forest. And what they found there changed everything. The bodies were lying close together, partially in a stream. They were dressed more warmly than the others. It seemed they had taken clothing from their dead companions. But their injuries were horrifying. Thebok's Brignol's had a crushed skull. Dubinina's chest was smashed inward, her ribs broken in a pattern so severe that experts later compared it to the force of a car crash. Even stranger, her eyes and tongue were missing. Another hiker, Kolivatov, showed similar internal trauma with no external wounds, as if the pressure had come from inside. The last member, Zolotaryov, had his ribs shattered and his eyes missing as well. Yet none of them had open injuries or signs of struggle. It was as if they had been hit by something massive, but invisible. The official investigation began immediately. The tent, the footprints, the bodies, nothing made sense together. At first, investigators suspected an avalanche, but the slope was too gentle for that. Others proposed a fight, perhaps panic or madness caused by the cold. But the hikers were friends. There were no signs of conflict. Some even suggested military involvement, secret weapons testing, or accidental exposure to radiation. In fact, traces of radiation were found on some of the hikers' clothing, deepening the mystery further. The autopsies described something strange: injuries caused by powerful unknown force. That was the exact phrase written in the reports. A powerful unknown force. No one could define what it meant. The case was quickly closed by Soviet authorities. The files were marked classified, and for decades, rumors and theories grew like shadows. People whispered about UFOs, secret weapons, escaped prisoners, or even a Yeti. The truth was buried under snow and secrecy. But behind the wild theories, the facts remained chillingly simple. 9 people had run barefoot into a blizzard, slashed their own tent open from the inside, and died in ways that defied explanation. Whatever they saw that night, whatever they heard, was terrifying enough to make them abandon all logic, all survival instinct, and flee into the dark. The Mountain of the Dead had lived up to its name. Even today, scientists, explorers, and writers have tried to reconstruct what happened. Some blame an avalanche that partially buried the tent, forcing the group to flee, only to die from exposure before they could return. Others suggest they heard strange sounds, infrasound waves caused by the wind, that triggered panic and confusion. But there are still details that refuse to fit any logical pattern. Why were the cuts made from inside the tent? Why were some of them barefoot, yet others died wearing their friends' clothes? Why were their injuries so extreme, yet invisible on the outside? And what caused the radiation traces on their clothes? To this day, the Dyatlov Pass Incident stands as one of the greatest unsolved mysteries of the 20th century. The mountain was renamed in their memory, Dyatlov Pass, but the silence that fell after their deaths still feels heavy, as if the snow remembers everything. The only survivor, Yuri Yudin, lived the rest of his life haunted by questions. He said that he often dreamed of that moment, of turning back, of saying goodbye. He said he sometimes imagined what it would have been like to be there, in that tent that night. He never found peace. Shortly before his death in 2013, he said one sentence that has stayed with everyone who studied the case. He said, "If I had not turned back that day, I would have died with them. But at least then, I would know what happened." And maybe that's the curse of Dyatlov Pass. No one will ever truly know. The mountain keeps its secrets. The wind still howls through the slopes where their tent once stood. And in the frozen silence of that place, you can almost hear the faint echo of footsteps running barefoot into the dark. The Dyatlov Pass case didn't end when the bodies were found. In many ways, that was only the beginning. The photographs, diaries, and autopsy reports raised more questions than answers. The Soviet investigators who arrived at the scene worked quietly, cautiously, and some say with a sense of fear. Not fear of what they might find, but fear of what they might be forbidden to reveal. The tent was carefully examined. It was large enough to hold all 9 hikers. Inside, sleeping bags were neatly laid out. Boots, coats, food, and even a flask of alcohol were left untouched. There were no signs of a struggle inside. But every cut on the tent was made from the inside out. That meant that someone, or all of them, had tried to get out in a hurry. The footprints leading away told a story of chaos. Some belonged to bare feet, some to socks. A few wore only one boot. They didn't run wildly. The prints were calm and deliberate, as if the group had left together in a controlled line. That single fact would puzzle investigators for decades. If they were terrified enough to flee without shoes, why were their steps measured and orderly? What force could make them act with both panic and control? The campsite was photographed in detail. The images are grainy and silent, showing a torn tent against a sea of snow, the tracks fading into the distance. The searchers who took those pictures later said that the entire area felt unnaturally quiet, like sound itself had frozen. One of them wrote in his report that the air around the tent felt heavy, like the mountain didn't want us there. When the autopsies began, things only got stranger. The first 5 bodies, those found earlier, had mostly died of hypothermia. Their skin was discolored by the cold, their hands showing signs of frostbite. Yet even among them, there were odd details. One had a minor skull fracture. Another had a small cut on his hand, as if he had been grabbing something sharp. Nothing serious enough to cause death, but the last 4 bodies, the ones found in the ravine, changed the story completely. They showed massive internal trauma without any external wounds. One doctor described it as like being hit by a blast wave. It was as though their bones had been shattered from pressure rather than impact. Then came the most horrifying discovery: missing eyes, missing tongues. These details have been sensationalized for years, but they were real. The autopsy confirmed that Lyudmila Dubinina's tongue was missing entirely, and both her eyes were gone. 2 others had empty eye sockets. Some experts later argued that this was caused by decomposition in running water, animals, bacteria, time, but others weren't so sure. The cuts seemed too clean, too deliberate. To this day, those details haunt anyone who studies the case. Radiation tests were performed on the clothing, and that's when investigators found another mystery. Several pieces, including Dubinina's sweater, contained traces of radioactive isotopes. It wasn't enough to kill them, but it was highly unusual. The official report mentioned it, but offered no explanation. Rumors quickly spread: secret weapons testing, nuclear contamination, military involvement. In the late 1950s Soviet Union, such things were never publicly discussed. Files were sealed, and witnesses were told not to speak about what they saw. One of the most puzzling things was the expression on the faces of the dead. The rescuers who found them said they looked terrified. Their mouths were open, their hands frozen in claw-like positions. Even in death, it looked like they were still trying to escape something. Something invisible. Something they could only feel. For months, the investigation dragged on. Reports were written, rewritten, and then quietly buried. The final statement closed the case with one sentence that only deepened the horror. It said the hikers died due to a compelling unknown force. That was it. No explanation, no conclusion. Just those words. A compelling unknown force. Years passed. The Soviet Union changed. But the mystery of Dyatlov Pass refused to die. Decades later, when the files were declassified, researchers began to re-examine every piece of evidence. The photos, the maps, the autopsies. Every step of their final journey was reconstructed. Modern scientists used drones, computer models, and weather simulations to test theories. Each time they came close, but never close enough. Some experts suggested an avalanche. It sounded logical. The tent had been cut open, the group fled in panic, and the injuries from the ravine could match a snow impact. But there was one problem: the slope wasn't steep enough for a traditional avalanche, and the tent itself was still partly standing when rescuers found it. That didn't match the damage an avalanche would cause. Another theory was a phenomenon known as infrasound. According to this idea, the wind rushing down the mountain could have produced low-frequency sound waves that triggered panic and disorientation in the hikers' brains. The pressure could have caused nausea, dread, and irrational fear, leading them to flee into the night. It sounds strange, but infrasound is real, and under certain conditions, it can induce powerful physical and emotional reactions. But would that be enough to make 9 trained hikers cut open their tent and run barefoot into freezing darkness? No one could prove it. Then came the military theories. Some believed that the group had accidentally wandered into a secret testing area where parachute mines or experimental weapons were being used. The bright orange lights seen in the sky by other hikers in the region seemed to support this. Witnesses described glowing orbs drifting over the mountains around the same time. Some of the injuries, especially the massive chest trauma, were consistent with blast waves. The radiation traces could also be explained by this. But again, there was no evidence. The Soviet military never confirmed any testing in that region, and if there was, those records are still classified. Others turned to folklore. The local Mansi people had long considered the area cursed. They told stories of strange lights, mysterious deaths, and voices in the wind. The Mountain of the Dead, they called it, long before Dyatlov and his team ever arrived. But superstition can only explain so much. Before we continue, tell me in comments you already hit that subscribe button and hit like. As the years went on, more and more theories emerged. Some claimed it was a Yeti attack, others aliens. Some even said the hikers had eaten hallucinogenic mushrooms or suffered from a kind of shared madness. Each explanation tried to make sense of something that felt senseless. But none of them fit every piece of the puzzle. Even the photographs they took that final day raise questions. The last few frames on their cameras are blurry, dark, and almost impossible to interpret. Some show the slope of the mountain in heavy snow. Others show strange lights in the distance, bright orbs floating in the night sky. No one knows what those lights were. Flashes from a lantern, a reflection, or something else. In later years, the surviving family members spoke about the investigation. Many said they were never given real answers. Some received the belongings of their loved ones, others never did. One mother reportedly said that when she touched her son's jacket at the morgue, it burned her hands slightly, as if it was still contaminated. Whether true or not, the story became part of the legend. The tragedy turned Dyatlov Pass into a forbidden name. For a long time, locals avoided the area. Those who did go there described a feeling of dread, a silence that felt alive. Hikers who visited said their compasses spun without reason, and their cameras malfunctioned in certain places. Of course, science would call that coincidence, but in the context of Dyatlov Pass, nothing feels coincidental. Years later, Yuri Yudin, the lone survivor, was interviewed many times. Each time his voice would shake when he spoke of his friends. He kept their photographs close, even in old age. He said he sometimes dreamed of them, standing together in the snow, smiling alive, just as they were before he turned back. But in his dreams, when they turned to look at him, their faces were pale and their eyes empty. He said he always woke up before they could speak. He died in 2013, never knowing the truth. After his death, renewed interest in the case brought international attention. Scientists, filmmakers, and investigators returned to the site. They set up modern equipment, measured the snow patterns, and even recreated the weather conditions from that night. The mountain hasn't changed. It still stands silent, covered in snow as if frozen in time. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. They considered 75 possible explanations and officially concluded that the hikers had died due to an avalanche caused by a slab of snow that had detached from above. It sounded simple, and for many it was a relief, a final answer to a story that had gone on for 60 years. But for others, it felt too neat, too convenient. How could an avalanche occur on such a gentle slope? Why were their injuries so inconsistent? And why did the official report still avoid explaining certain details? The radiation, the missing body parts, the strange expressions. The avalanche theory might close the case on paper, but it doesn't close it in the human mind. Because deep down, people know that something about that night doesn't add up. The logical explanations feel like attempts to calm something that refuses to be calm. Whatever happened on that mountain was violent, sudden, and terrifying enough to erase reason itself. It wasn't just death that claimed them. It was fear. There is a photo, one of the last taken, showing the tent at dusk, the hikers moving around, adjusting ropes, smiling faintly despite the cold. It's haunting because you know what comes next. You can almost feel the moment where laughter turns into confusion, confusion into panic, and panic into silence, and then nothing. Just the endless, white nothing of the Urals. For 60 years, the snow has fallen there, season after season, covering everything. But every winter, when the wind rises over Syakal, people say it still carries a whisper. Maybe it's the wind. Maybe it's something else. A sound that says, "We still don't know." The Dyatlov Pass incident remains unsolved not because we lack data, but because some mysteries resist being tamed by logic. Maybe the hikers saw something the human mind couldn't comprehend. Something that made reason vanish in an instant. Or maybe, as some believe, the mountain itself demanded its toll. Whatever it was, it left behind not just 9 bodies, but a question that still echoes through time. What made 9 people run barefoot into the dark, straight into their own deaths, without ever looking back? No one knows, and maybe no one ever will. After the case was officially closed, Dyatlov Pass faded from public record, hidden behind Soviet secrecy and whispers. But those who had seen the scene firsthand never forgot. The rescuers, the doctors, the investigators, all carried something with them, something they couldn't explain. Some would say they felt watched while working at the site. Others said they could still hear faint cracks echoing through the snow, like footsteps that never stopped. Even decades later, when they were interviewed, their voices would tremble when describing what they found. It wasn't just the bodies, they said. It was the feeling, the sense that something else was there. The families of the hikers refused to stay silent. They wanted answers, but every attempt to get them was met with silence or denial. Official reports vanished. Notes were missing. Files were marked confidential. The Soviet authorities didn't want rumors about unexplained deaths or military secrets spreading. The country had bigger things to protect than the truth about 9 lost students. So the families were left only with grief and doubt. In Sverdlovsk, at the university, a memorial was quietly erected. A small stone engraved with their names. No ceremony, no speeches. just a silent marker for a tragedy no one could talk about. But among students, the story grew into legend. They whispered it to one another in dorms, in hushed tones late at night. The way the tent was cut, the missing eyes, the footprints that faded into the forest. Each time it was told, it grew darker, more mysterious, more alive. Then came the rumors. Some claimed that when rescuers first arrived at the tent, they saw strange glowing orbs in the sky. Others said the snow around the bodies gave off a faint blue light. A few even believed the hikers had stumbled onto something secret, an experimental test, a weapon, or a craft that wasn't meant to be seen. None of these stories were ever proven. But in a country built on secrecy, the unknown always felt possible. The personal belongings recovered from the camp were locked away for years. When they were finally examined again, small details painted a clearer, yet more disturbing, picture of their final hours. There were knives, compasses, a camera with half-exposed film, a journal with unfinished sentences, and a small penknife with traces of blood on the handle. No one could tell whose blood it was. The last photos on the camera were almost unreadable. Blurry lights, indistinct shadows, the outlines of trees and snow. But to some, they looked like evidence of something watching them. Even today, experts argue over what those final photographs show. Some see nothing but random light. Others swear they see shapes. Tall, human, like silhouettes in the distance. It could be tricks of light, exposure errors. Or it could be something else. Something they captured without realizing it. As the decades passed, the Dyatlov mystery spread beyond Russia. Researchers, writers, and filmmakers tried to piece it together. Each built their own version of what happened. Some focused on the science, the physics of snow, wind, and sound. Others leaned into the horror, convinced that whatever killed them was not of this world. Books were written. Documentaries were made. Websites dedicated to every small clue. And yet, no matter how deep people dig, they always end up back where the story started: a torn tent on a frozen slope, and 9 lives erased by something unseen. Modern forensic experts have revisited the case many times. Using 3D modeling, weather reconstruction, and trauma analysis, they've tested every theory imaginable. The avalanche theory remains the most official explanation. Scientists argue that a small, delayed slab of snow could have broken loose and hit the tent, forcing the hikers to flee. The blunt, forced trauma found on some bodies could match the pressure of such an event. It explains the panic, the injuries, the cuts from inside the tent. But even those who support the avalanche theory admit it doesn't answer everything. It doesn't explain the missing eyes or tongue. It doesn't explain the radiation. It doesn't explain why they didn't take their boots or coats, or why some of them made it so far before collapsing. Some researchers proposed that the group suffered from paradoxical undressing, a strange phenomenon in hypothermia where the body, in its final stages, creates a sensation of burning heat, causing victims to remove their clothing. That could explain why some of them were half naked. But again, not why they left the tent in the first place. Then there are the theories about military involvement. In the late 1950s, the Soviet Union was conducting secret tests across the Urals, including parachute mines and high-altitude explosions. If the hikers had witnessed something they weren't supposed to see, it might explain the strange lights in the sky and the unusual injuries. A blast wave could easily cause internal trauma without visible wounds. Radiation could have come from military materials. The government's quick decision to classify the case might also fit this narrative. But there is no evidence, just silence. And silence in this story says more than words ever could. There's another theory, stranger, but harder to dismiss once you hear it. Some believe the group was affected by infrasound, low-frequency sound waves created by the wind passing over the mountain's shape. These frequencies can cause panic, nausea, hallucinations, and feelings of dread. In a confined tent, with pressure dropping and wind howling, it's possible that the hikers experienced overwhelming fear, confusion, and disorientation. They could have fled in terror, believing something was attacking them. But this still doesn't explain the injuries that followed. Still others look to the supernatural. The Mansi people warned outsiders not to climb that mountain. They said it was cursed, that spirits guarded it. To them, Kolat-Syakhl, the mountain of the dead, wasn't just a name. It was a truth. They believed that disturbing it would awaken something ancient. When the hikers disappeared, the Mansi were briefly suspected, but no evidence linked them. Even so, many of them refused to go near that slope again. Some modern hikers who visited Dyatlov Pass describe a strange stillness there. The air feels thicker, heavier. Birds avoid the area. Compass needles drift. They say you can stand in the middle of the pass and feel like you're being watched. Not by something close, but by something vast, as if the mountain itself remembers. In one interview, a rescuer recalled something he'd never told anyone before. He said that when they found the bodies in the ravine, one of the men, Zolotaryov, was holding a small notebook pressed to his chest. Inside were faint pencil marks, almost erased by water. Only one line was legible. It said, "Now we know." No one has ever been able to confirm that quote. The notebook was lost like so many other pieces of evidence. But the phrase lingers, haunting, incomplete. Now we know. Know what? Years later, technology allowed researchers to re-examine old evidence. Digital scans of the photographs revealed new details, small reflections, unfamiliar shapes in the corners of frames. In one photo, a faint light appears in the sky, slightly blurred, moving upward. Some say it's nothing but a snowflake or camera artifact. Others say it's something more. Something the hikers saw that night that made them run. There were also eyewitness accounts from nearby villages. A few reported seeing glowing orbs above the mountains around the same date. Orange spheres that hovered and moved slowly across the sky before vanishing. These reports were ignored by the authorities, but later resurfaced in declassified files. If true, they add another layer of strangeness to an already unexplainable event. To this day, every few years, someone new claims to have solved the Dyatlov mystery. Yet the mystery remains. The truth feels just out of reach, like something glimpsed in the corner of your eye, disappearing the moment you turn to look. There's something profoundly human about that mountain. It reminds us that nature doesn't care about our logic or our courage. It doesn't care about our explanations. Sometimes it just demands silence. The 9 hikers were young, curious, and fearless. They went into the mountains seeking challenge, adventure, and beauty. Instead, they met something that stripped away all understanding, leaving only terror. Their graves lie together in Yekaterinburg. Visitors still come leaving flowers, candles, and notes. Some speak softly to the wind, as if asking the mountain to give back its secret. But the mountain never answers. It never has. It only watches, silent, indifferent, eternal. Every winter, new snow buries the traces of that night. But sometimes, when the cold is deep and the moon is full, people say the wind sounds different there. It carries voices, faint, overlapping, whispering. Some swear they can hear laughter. Others say it's crying. Whatever it is, it never stops. The Dyatlov Pass Incident is not just a mystery. It's a reminder that there are still places on this earth where the unknown is stronger than us, where reason collapses, where fear takes shape, and where even after 60 years the snow still hides more than it reveals. Time kept moving, but the mountain stayed the same. Decades passed, and the Dyatlov Pass mystery only grew colder, yet somehow more alive. It became a question that refused to die, a story that slipped between science and superstition, between truth and legend. People wanted closure, but some stories don't want to end. In 2019, 60 years after the tragedy, Russian authorities reopened the investigation. They claimed it was time to finally put the case to rest. Modern equipment, forensic reanalysis, climate modeling, everything was brought in. The results were meant to end the debate once and for all. Their conclusion: a slab avalanche, a delayed snow shift caused by wind and temperature change. The hikers, caught off guard in the night, panicked and fled. That's what they said, simple. Logical. But logic doesn't erase fear. Even after that official statement, experts around the world pointed out the gaps. The slope was too gentle, the injuries too severe, the footprints too orderly. And then there was the human side. the pure, raw panic written into every detail of that night. You can't model fear in a lab. You can't simulate what drives a group of people to slice through their only shelter and walk barefoot into death. One of the surviving friends of the group, Yuri Yudin, who had turned back earlier due to illness, lived with that question for the rest of his life. He said he felt both lucky and cursed. Lucky to be alive, cursed to not know why. Every year he returned to the graves of his friends. He'd bring flowers and stand silently, staring into the distance. In one interview before his death, he said quietly, "If I had not turned back that day, I would have known the truth. But maybe some truths aren't meant to be known, because the Dyatlov Pass Incident isn't just a mystery of evidence. It's a mystery of the human mind. It touches something deep inside us, that ancient, primal fear of the unknown. The idea that even the strongest, smartest, and bravest among us can vanish into the dark without reason or warning. When we look at the photos of those smiling young hikers, their faces full of life, laughter, and hope, it's hard not to feel something break inside. They had no idea what was waiting for them. They thought it was just another climb, another adventure. And maybe that's what makes it so haunting. Because we all chase something. We all walk into the unknown at some point, thinking we can handle it. But the unknown doesn't care. The Dyatlov Pass stands today as both a grave and a monument, not to fear, but to curiosity, to the human instinct to seek, to push forward, even into the cold silence of mystery. Visitors still hike there. They leave footprints in the same snow, stand in the same freezing wind, and whisper the same question. What really happened here? No one ever gets an answer. Only the wind replies, moving softly across the slopes, erasing every trace just as it did in 1959. The mountain remains patient. The snow falls, the years pass, and the silence holds its secrets tight. Maybe it was an avalanche. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was something else. Maybe the truth isn't meant to be understood, only felt. Because when you stand there, under that wide, empty sky, surrounded by endless white, you begin to realize something. You realize how small you are, how fragile, how easily your warmth could fade into the cold. And in that moment, you understand why they ran. You understand why the world will never let their story go. The Dyatlov Pass Incident will always remain what it is, a scar carved into history, half science, half nightmare, a reminder that nature doesn't owe us explanations, a reminder that some questions echo forever. And maybe, just maybe, when the snow is quiet enough and the wind moves just right, the mountain still whispers their names. Not in anger, not in malice, but in memory. Because somewhere between the silence and the storm, between reason and fear, the truth is still there, sleeping under the snow. And so the story ends where it began, in the cold, endless white of the Ural Mountains. 9 souls lost to something we may never truly understand. Their footsteps erased, their voices carried away by the wind, leaving behind only questions and the echo of fear. Maybe the mountain remembers, maybe it never forgot. But for the rest of us, the Dyatlov Pass will always be more than just a place on a map. It's a reminder that the unknown still waits out there, quiet, patient, and watching. And sometimes it doesn't need to be found. Please like the video, hit subscribe, and share your thoughts in comments.